Well, this is take 2. I just spent about 20 minutes here in the studio, where I am, WRHU, talking first about the fact that I was back in the studio a day later after being at the University of Pennsylvania, and I had this whole pre-reading commentary about the fact that after I recorded in Irvine Auditorium, I went and listened to the two sort of keynote speakers, Linda and Graham Smith of New Zealand, Maoris from New Zealand, and that hearing what they had to say about the relationship with education, formal education, and the sense in which it hadn't ruined them, but actually it helped them to open up new vistas for the work that they would ultimately do. I talked about that and how important that was in view of the video that I'd recorded before, going to hear them. In fact, I was finishing up doing the work on uploading yesterday's meditation when Troy Richardson, my colleague, called out from the stage, because I was where the soundboard would be appropriately, and Troy called out, okay, the next session's getting started. So I went right to hear the Smith speaking, and it was really kind of I don't want to say reassuring, but in a sense it sort of confirmed and affirmed certain things I wanted to say, but I was having trouble saying them, which is a whole interesting thing in and of itself. Anyway, I said all that, and then I went and read the meditation from today, and then I was doing post-reading commentary when the video shut down. So I'm going to take that as a cue that I should cut to the chase, perhaps record this meditation in 10 minutes or less. I am in WRHU. I'm recording the Dead Zone that will be aired in 2 weeks, and I like coming into the studio because it kind of captures a couple things. One, the work I do and the multi-modalities and the multifaceted sense in which I do philosophy. I don't see this work here at the board and the radio work as in a wholly different set, but I just see it as part of a set. It's along the spectrum of the work. Also because of the idea of the studio being important, where philosophy happens, as being in a studio. I think of it more as studio work than performance, right? So when I talked about this morning with my students, I talked about, our being together and the work we do in the seminar room is like going into a studio, being in like a recording studio in particular, a music recording studio. It could also be for the students that are the dance educators. It could also be, the work that they do there. But I am here at WRHU, and I'm going to have to go to a mic break in a second, so I'm going to start to read the meditation that was written originally this day, April the 3rd, 2004, and I'm going to read it today, this day, April the 3rd, 2014, as I continue with the 10-year commemoration of the experiment in being and learning. And yeah, so let me get going on this, and then I'll hopefully be able to record this video as it comes up. So again, this is a close reading of the Allegory of the Cave. This is chapter 4 of Being and Learning, and it's we're moving along with now the whole allegory having been presented, and now this is like the post allegory sort of work that I'm going to do. So the allegory has been sort of presented and laid out, and now I'm going to be doing post-reading commentary. But before I do that, I think I'm going to go to my mic break, and so I get that in, and then I'll read the meditation. Grateful Dead from 4/13, 1983, from the Patrick Gymnasium at the University of Vermont, Groovy UV, as it's known. One of my all-time favorite shows, one of my all-time favorite bootlegs. Coming up then, after this, we're going to hear one more track from this show, and then on to 4/17, 1983, the very first show that I ever attended. And so it's the middle of April, so I like to commemorate that first show that I ever attended here. So coming up next, more music from 4/13/83, right here on the Dead Zone. So that's a mic break, and I hope again that I'm not taking too much time away from what I'm trying to do here. Estimated Profit, that's the song in the background. And Estimated Profit's one of my handles. Yes, I know that's an audacious, but so EP. EDEP. Okay, so onward. The prisoner returns below, empowered, with a mix of joy and sorrow. What happens to him when he returns is unexpected and perplexing. Of course, it is not surprising to read that the one who has been released and now returns faces similar physical challenges that he encountered on the way out of the cave. Upon his return, described as a spontaneous act, his eyes must again become adjusted to the conditions of his old home. He rejoins his old friends in their discussion of the shadows, but now the transformation that he has undergone renders him incapable of discerning these images. His new way of seeing is worthless in the cave, and he finds himself a stranger in his old home. He's unsteady and requires time to readjust to the darkness. But the story indicates that this time is not available to him. His old friends are impatient with him and are uninterested in hearing about his journey and the change that it has caused in him. Rather, his unsteadiness becomes a source of ridicule before he's able to regain his own form. His old friends, who have remained in their places and have continued with their usual habits, recognize his transformation but identify it as this kind of malady. He's returned ruined or sick, incapacitated. From where they sit, his eyes appear damaged by his journey out of the cave. If this is the outcome of the releasement from the cave, then it surely isn't something worth anyone's while to attempt it. In fact, the silent and unidentified liberator should not attempt to release anyone else, for they would surely kill him if he tried. The story ends abruptly with this warning against the liberator, which in effect summarizes the welcome the released prisoner receives upon returning to his old friends. The end is true to form, as the story is structured and moved by sudden and unexpected shifts and changes. If we think through the 4 parts, we recognize that each stage was initiated and culminated in a sudden shift and change. The essence of the story is located in this spontaneous turning, paideia. So we should not be surprised that upon his return, the one who has been released is again disoriented and estranged. He has come full circle with his return to the cave, and he is no longer a cave dweller. The transformation is complete, and there is indeed no way for him to properly take up his old place with his new comportment, his new way of seeing. But while we, the listener, can understand how the story would conclude with the sudden and unexpected change that initiated the tale, we are not so easily convinced by Plato's way of telling it. The conclusion of the story is truly evocative and calls out for interpretation and ultimately rewriting. Perhaps what it calls for is an extension, because we want to know what the sojourner's response might be when given the opportunity to tell his version of the story. What happens after the ridicule, derision, and threats settle down to a murmur and finally give way to an account by the one who's been released? If the exchange of competing versions of their perceptions is the dominant mode of life in the cave, then certainly those who have remained in bondage would want to hear from their returning friend. While his eyes have taken the brunt of his transformation, we know nothing of his ears and voice, and can only suppose that he has retained his capacity to speak and hear. While he's unable to see what they see in the way that they see it, we have to believe that he could speak to them in a way that they would understand, even if they became impatient and irritated by what he tells them, even if he provokes anger to the point of violence. His capacity to speak would enable him to tell his tale, but if the transformation is complete, then what he says will be said in an evocative manner. And that's the end of that. So, I'm going to try to make this quick because I don't want the thing to crash on me again. I don't want a paideia, which is one that I don't know what I'm being turned toward, but this is, important. So 2 things. One, it's, the importance of the paideia as spontaneity, as the turning as one that happens spontaneously. And this is something that I've become more and more interested in, from Arendt to Kant, because indeed it's Kant that seems to have inspired Arendt to have this focus on spontaneity. And spontaneity for Rent is absolutely crucial, because if we don't live in a predetermined and deterministic reality, if there is such a thing as human freedom, then spontaneity is the key. This what she actually calls miracles. And thinking is one of the faculty of thinking, the power. Faculty is from the Latin facultas, means power. The power of thinking is where spontaneity emerges from. So it's the force from which spontaneity is disclosed. So spontaneity is key, and paideia, which is the moment where learning begins, happens then, I'm suggesting here, very importantly, in a spontaneous way. Paideia happens as an example of spontaneity, or it happens through spontaneity. It is spontaneous. And the allegory is sort of my evidence for that. And so this is key. The other key point here that I want to emphasize, and not go on too long about it, is this notion that the allegory is something that should and can be rewritten, or in this case, arranged. So we talk about like taking a piece of music that's been performed, it's written out, and then you talk about, well, the arrangement of this piece of music. So I'm reading the autobiography of Miles Davis, and he talks about him and Gil Evans doing arrangements of music. Sketches of Spain is an example of an arrangement of a previously written, composed, and performed piece of music. So the allegory as something that can be arranged differently or given an arrangement is a very important claim I'm making here, and a lot of the work I've been doing it is about arrangement, right? It's about taking ideas, taking concepts, and arranging them in new ways. I mean, originary thinking, there's a sense in which, if it drawing from Rainer Schermann, I'm saying it's retrospective and prospective. One of the ways to think about the retrospective of originary thinking is, taking material out of the songbook and rearranging it and putting it in a new way, and then offering up then towards the perspective, the future of this new arrangement. I think Du Bois' work, The Souls of Black Folk, is exactly this. He's taking music, lines of music, bars of music, as well as lines from the spirituals, and he's arranging them in a different context, which is his book. At the beginning of every chapter, The Souls of Black Folk begins with lines of music and lyrics from the spirituals. So those are the two things that really, I think, stand out in this particular meditation. One, paideia as spontaneity, and two, the idea of arrangement, and the allegory of the cave in particular as calling for an arrangement, or as I'm saying, an extension. Because indeed, the sense of sight of the prisoner has been ruined or damaged, or is having this trouble of adjusting from light to darkness and darkness to light. But there's nothing to be said about his hearing or his ability to speak. And that's, in some sense, unaffected. And yet it's speaking and hearing that is so crucial to the whole interaction, right? The dialogic interactions happening amongst the cave dwellers, right? What they see are shadows, but what they share with one another are their different ways of their perceptions about those shadows, and that becomes the thing that they talk about, that becomes the thing that they share in common. Yes, the shadows they all sort of share in their perception of, but what becomes theirs and what they share in common are their ways of describing the shadows, and it becomes the dialogue that is of the demos. This is the point. The dialogue that they have between one another, insofar as it is a dialogue, is what they share. And so it's through speaking and hearing that this happens. And so far as we know, the prisoner's return to the cave has not affected either his speaking or his hearing. In fact, he says very little. And so this is where the rearrangement of the allegory begins. And so that's the other important part. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think I've successfully recorded this, and then I'm going to stop here, perhaps with a little music from Estimated Prophet.